My name is Dan Addington. I'm an artist and curator living in Chicago. I was born in Denver, Colorado, and grew up out west. Ended up in the Midwest, and finally ended up getting a master's degree at Illinois State University. From there, I moved to Chicago, and I am the owner of Addington Gallery, which has been there in River North since 2007. Married to Steph Roberts, who is also an artist and educator, and we've got one son, Adric, who's 15.
My name's Doug DeWitt. I'm originally from Northwest Ohio. I grew up playing in my creek near my house and on my grandparents' farm, running around the property out there and running around in the buildings, exploring. After high school, I went to undergraduate school to study art and graphic design at Bowling Green State University in Ohio. And after graduation, I moved to Boston for a couple of years, where I worked and kind of got to know the East Coast landscape a little bit. And then after a couple of years, I came back to the Midwest to Illinois State University to study painting with well, it turns out it was with Harold Greger, Harold Boyd, Ken Holder, and a bunch of other people. And so I was here for about 2 years, and then moved to Chicago, where I've been ever since, either in the city or in the near suburbs.
Yeah. I thought that the title Material Witness kind of makes sense, because a lot of what I've been thinking about in terms of the qualities of the materials themselves and how important that is to the making of the work, and how it's important to be intentional about those things, and that these natural materials carry a certain power before you ever start to manipulate them. And I see that that recognition in Doug's work, even though he takes it in a different direction. I think that is probably the major intersecting point, and I thought that the title kind of echoes that. Yeah, no, it's really exciting to be exhibiting at the McLean County Arts Center. When I was a graduate student here, I worked for a period of time at the Arts Center and was even the director here for a little bit. And so I'm used to this space. I'm used to coming and seeing the exhibitions here, and I've often looked at it and gone, what would it take to exhibit here? What kind of work would make sense in this gigantic space, and how could you tame the space? How could you work with that space? And so it's exciting all these years later to get that opportunity. I think this is really great.
This is the first two-person show we've been in together, yes. We've had works in shows, you know, like a piece here and there in a group show together, but this is definitely the first dialogue we've had in a gallery with our work. So the materials for the found object work that I make are weathered materials, wood, rusty metal, bones, sticks, stones, things like that. They're all combinations of, the work is combinations of natural objects and man-made objects, but the man-made objects in particular are in a state of decay. So there's a couple of reasons for me using those materials. One is just simply because I love the textures and colors and the appearance of those materials, and I kind of credit my exploration of my grandparents' farm buildings and things like that as kind of a part of the reason that has resonated with me all these years. The other part of the reason for those objects is that I usually try to combine the man-made and the natural objects in some way in the same piece. And there's a sort of subtle attempt to portray a relationship between nature and mankind that is in harmony, but only through decay. So through that decay, I'm looking for beauty in a combination of these materials, which kind of seem to speak to me about how they want me to arrange themselves. But what I'm kind of trying to get to is that combination of a man-made and a natural object that look okay together now because they're in a state of decay, as opposed to being contrasted against each other.
Well, I was hanging out a lot with, you mentioned graduate student work, and I remember hanging out a lot with some sculptors, one of which we're showing as part of this exhibition. And I just remembered the love of materials that I would see in these artists, that it wasn't like they were given a thing like, here are some acrylic paints, you have to use them, or oils, or it wasn't a given. It was more like, why do you use wood in your sculptures? Because I love wood, or I love glass and the qualities that the material brings. And that really rang true to me, and it took a while. I didn't really start using encaustic until once I'd been in Chicago and started showing, but I'd been fooling around with it in graduate school, and the materials really seemed to carry a lot of weight already. And I had begun experimenting with beeswax in its more natural state, as opposed to some more typical encaustic paintings where pigment is loaded up in the wax and it becomes a medium, a carrier of the color. In this case, I just wanted to find a way to use that raw beeswax and let it be what it was in the painting. And at the same time, I had started experimenting with tar, and it had this rich kind of from the earth quality, and that seemed very elemental. The beeswax seemed elemental and natural, and they were kind of doppelgangers to each other. One of them was really holding light, and the other one was just sucking it up, and those two materials started to make sense to me, and that's where a lot of this work rises out of those kind of observations.
So Dan and I have been friends and artists for a long time now, and I think what you'll see in this show is that the similarities in our work have to do with texture, earthy colors, and sensitivity towards not only those materials but also a reference to nature, a strong reference to nature as a foundation for both of our work. The materials themselves, we don't necessarily share, we don't use the same materials, but there's an earthiness about his work and my work that I think resonate back and forth together.